I present Melanie Trecek-King, who is an associate professor of biology at Massasoit Community College, where she teaches a general education science course designed to equip students with empowering critical thinking, information literacy, and science literacy skills. She's an active speaker and consultant and loves to share her teaching skills, not facts approach to other science educators and help organizations meet their goals through better thinking. She's also the education director of the Mental Immunity Project and the Cognitive Immunology Research Collaborative, which aims to advance and apply the science of mental immunity to inoculate minds against misinformation, which sounds like a very worthwhile thing, especially these days. So with that, I present Melanie Trecek-King.
Hi, everybody. Okay, this is the big. Okay, first question. Are you seeing my presentation and me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you all for having me. I'm greatly honored to be here. And this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. I'm sure you've had discussions with people and maybe necessarily haven't gone very well. One of the things I like to ask my students, though, is what they've changed their minds about. And that always leads to a really fun discussion because usually people can't remember changing their minds. But the good news is it does happen. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with telling you a story, and then we're going to explore various aspects of critical thinking and then come back to the story to see how it ends. So one morning in the spring of 1954, Dorothy Martin, who is fashioned herself as a psychic outside of Chicago, woke up and was receiving a message. Her platform was automatic handwriting. So she would receive messages and write down what she was receiving. Well, the words that she was receiving was from somebody who was going by the name of Sananda, who is actually Jesus, but currently living on the planet Clarion. So Jesus, or Sananda, told Dorothy to gather other followers, or seekers as they called them, to follow the guardians and hear their prophecies. And so they met regularly to advance their spiritual development. And one day in late July, they received a message that Sananda was going to meet them at a nearby Air Force base. So he was going to come in his flying saucer and land and meet these seekers. So everybody got really excited. They went out to the Air Force base to meet Sananda, but nobody showed up. And they were really disappointed. They noticed this man on the road. He looked kind of lost. He refused food and drink. It was a hot day, but he was acting kind of strange. They went back later, and Dorothy received another message that had actually been Sananda in disguise, checking on them to make sure that they were following. They were absolutely ecstatic that they had actually seen Sananda. As time went on, Dorothy received a message that there was going to be a global flood that would destroy the Earth on December 21st. The Guardians were going to rescue the Seekers in their flying saucer, so they were told to make their preparations. The story was picked up in a local newspaper. You can see the story here. And there was a psychologist named Leon Festinger who was reading his Sunday morning paper over his coffee and saw this and thought, wow, interesting. I wonder what will happen on December 22nd when the world didn't end. So he and his fellow psychologists, mostly graduate students, infiltrated this group. And for the next 6 months, they followed this group to see what would happen. So we're going to come back to the end of the story later, but keep in mind the seekers waiting for the world to end. So let's talk about our beliefs. Belief is actually a hard term to define. The most basic definition is things that you think are true. They don't have to be true, but if you accept them as true, they are your beliefs. They're mental models of reality that help you understand how the world works, right? So you've got this framework in mind and you need to make predictions about what might happen. They're shortcuts then to help you understand and make these predictions. And importantly, we act on our beliefs whether they're true or not, right? To us, our beliefs are true, or we wouldn't hold them. And so the decisions that we make, the actions that we take are based on the assumptions that our brain is making that these beliefs are true. Now, importantly, this idea of certainty, like if you ask people about their beliefs and the strength of their beliefs, often people think that they're true or false, as opposed to putting them on a spectrum. But a lot of people think of yes or no. And when you're really certain in a belief, when you accept it as true, that idea of certainty is a feeling. It's something that happens to you, and you don't necessarily control it. And it can happen almost instantaneously again, whether or not that belief is true. Our beliefs come from a variety of different sources, but I've clarified them into two broad ones. And the first is our personal experiences. As a critical thinking educator, I have found that one of the most difficult things for students to accept, to recognize, is that their personal experiences might not necessarily be the most reliable way of knowing. People will say, I know aliens are real. I saw a UFO. Or I know acupuncture works or homeopathy works because I tried it and I felt better. Our brains are constantly searching for patterns and then assigning meaning. And those beliefs are influenced by things like our biases, our emotions, our expectations, our assumptions, our prior knowledge. I'm going to tell you a quick story. When I was a kid, I must have been about 5 or 6. My grandma was staying over and she was sleeping in bed next to me. And I woke up to this fingernail that was like slowly moving up my arm. And when I opened my eyes, I saw this old woman and she had like long, straggly gray hair. And I was terrified. So I tried to yell at my grandma to wake her up. And the woman put her hand over my mouth. And I still remember the feeling of that cold hand on my mouth. And I tried to yell harder. And she put her hands on my chest and pushed down on my chest. And I was screaming. I was trying to scream to my grandma, and I couldn't, right? She was holding me down and covering my mouth. Do any of you know what that might be? If I was in front of you, I would love to have this conversation. Some of you may know this is a sleep paralysis. So sleep paralysis is when your brain is awake, but the motor neurons to your muscles are turned off. We don't want to act out what's happening in our sleep because we could hurt ourselves. And so in that sleep process, it's turned off. But in sleep paralysis, the brain has turned on, but the motor neurons are still off. Now, this is a problem because your brain is awake and then it can't move. Your body can't move and it wants to know, why can't I move? And so your brain relies on assumptions that it has about how it knows how the world works to explain it. And throughout history, you get things like demons, like succubi and incubi. You get ghosts and aliens and mass murderers and any number of things. Your brain is relying on what it knows to explain. Now, in my case, and I was like 5, I was pretty young. The scariest thing my brain can think of as to why I couldn't move, and I kid you not, was was the witch from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the Disney movie. Like, she was terrifying. And so I was seeing a ghost that looked like that witch. Now, if I didn't know today what sleep paralysis was, my brain would still be relying on assumptions to explain that. All that's to say then, if we don't understand the limits of our personal experiences to inform us about the world, if we don't realize that we can be fooled, then we might jump to beliefs that aren't necessarily true. The other place that our beliefs come from is others, people we trust, right? So if you look at a map of global religions, you see Christians in one place and Muslims in another place and Jews in another place, and then you'll get sects of different religions in different places. We accept the beliefs of people around us. We accept from our parents, from clergy, from teachers, from politicians, from our family. Humans are social primates. We spent the vast majority of our history in groups, in tribes, and we had to trust those group members because if we didn't, then they were literally life or death. And so we relied on them for safety. We don't live in those small environments anymore, but we still carry that tribal aspect of our brain. I can go online today and I can find other people who share a belief with me, no matter how untrue or uncommon that belief is. All that's to say, if we trust people, then we get that wisdom and we accept something as true. You may have heard this idea of post-truth. It was even the word of the year several years ago. I don't think that's true. Like if we didn't think our beliefs were true, we wouldn't hold them. What happens instead is we are placing trust in different places. So instead of post-truth, I like to think of post-trust. What we're doing is the heuristic that we're using on who is trustworthy. We're trusting people in our tribes, but not necessarily reliable sources of information. To me, this really underscores the value of placing your trust wisely. I mean, for example, I know that the Earth goes around the sun. I don't know that because I've seen it or because I've done the math. I know that because people I trust say that, right? It is received wisdom. I just have placed my trust in those that I think have the best access to that knowledge. So placing our trust wisely is incredibly important if we want our beliefs to be as close to true as humans are capable of knowing a truth. So our beliefs come from different sources, but if you think in our head of all of our beliefs forming a web, this comes from Willard Van Orman Quine. And the idea is that if you imagine all the beliefs in your head forming a web where they're interconnected, right? There's nodes. And as you go inward, they become more and more central, more and more core or foundational. Those core beliefs are the underlying beliefs that impact all of the other ones. They tend to be linked to most closely to our identity, to our values. These tend to be the ones that are most important to our social groups that tie us with our identity to those others in our social groups. They matter the most. And they influence all of the others, and they are the hardest to change. But notice how when you move outward, they're still all connected. So if we're looking, it's easier when I talk to my students about this, it's easier to think about other people's beliefs than it is ours. And if we want to start there, that's the easiest thing to do. So if I'm trying to have a conversation with somebody and I don't agree with one of their beliefs, and I'm trying to tell them that this belief is not correct. And here's why. And I'm going to give them all of the facts that I think are convincing. The problem is, to that person, that belief is connected to a bunch of other beliefs. Our brains prefer consistency. All of them have to fit together in a way that makes sense. They prefer consistency to inconsistent beliefs that aren't true. Did I say that right? So basically, we would rather have an incorrect belief in there that makes everything else make sense, right? So if we take a belief out, there's a gap. And that person needs to maintain all of their beliefs in some sort of internally consistent way. Which is why if we're trying to address that belief, then we need to remember that there's a bunch of things around it as well. Now, not all of our beliefs are evidence-based, and it's important to remember that, in that there are fundamentally different types of beliefs. Broadly speaking, there are two types. A falsifiable belief is one that is evidence-based in that it is potentially, we can prove it wrong with evidence. They are objective. Versus an unfalsifiable belief is impossible to disprove. And if you can't disprove a belief with evidence, if it is not a belief that can be disproven, then any evidence for it is essentially superfluous. So that in our heads, it's important to keep in mind the kinds of things that are evidence-based and not. So let me give you some examples. The first category are subjective beliefs. These are things like opinions, emotions, values, preferences. For example, if I said that cats make the best pets. Okay, now I am crazy cat lady, and I hold this to be absolutely true that cats make the best pets. I could give you evidence for that, right? I could tell you cats are quiet. They're self-cleaning. In February in Massachusetts, when it's cold and dark and snowy in the morning, I don't have to take my cat outside. I can sit in my warm bed and snuggle with my cute little cuddly kitty. Okay. While I do hold that opinion to be true, and I jest about it, of course, because dogs are great, they're just way too much work for me. It's not a falsifiable belief. Importantly, though, subjective beliefs tend to be amongst those that we hold the most strongly. And so what we do is we look for evidence to support that belief. For example, if I said abortion was murder, animal testing is wrong, those kinds of things are subjective. They're fundamentally not falsifiable. But we tend to hold those kinds of beliefs most strongly. And so we find evidence to build like a shield around it to protect it. And what I'm trying to point out is just recognize that you may value that, but it is not an evidence-based belief. So be wary of trying to protect something with evidence that cannot be proven wrong with evidence. Another example would be things that are vague. For example, if I told you that you have a need to be liked and admired by people, there have been times where you've wondered whether you've done or said the right thing. Those are vague. They basically apply to all of us. Those are what's known as Barnum statements or for statements, and their power is in their vagueness. Maybe one other example, let me clarify that. So in the United States, supplements are by law not allowed to make specific health claims. So if you scroll through the aisle, in the pharmacy through supplements, you'll see things like boosts the immune system, supports the respiratory system, promotes health and well-being. They say those things not because they're broadly that efficacious, but because they cannot make specific health claims because they haven't been tested. But what we do is we're scrolling through the aisles and we see boost the immune system. Wow, that sounds amazing. Who doesn't want that? Actually, you don't want that. You don't want to boost your immune system. It's an autoimmune disorder. Nevertheless, we think that's great. The point here is with vague claims, we need to make sure that we are evaluating vague claims based on the claim itself and not on what we want the claim to be. We impart our own desires onto vague claims. So in order to be falsifiable, though, it has to be a specific claim. Another one is supernatural claims. Gods, spirits. With my students, I always try to use claims that aren't necessarily triggering. So I might go in with something like God, but that would trigger. So instead, what I would say is, and this is a true story, you all know who Pythagoras was, right? The Pythagorean theorem. I kind of sort of see a few people nod their heads. Okay, Pythagoras. So Pythagoras was obviously a smart guy, right? Pythagoras was part of a group that thought that when you farted, you lost your soul. Okay. So I'll tell my students this, and okay, then they laugh, they chuckle, because look, farts are funny. Okay, that's great. Then I ask them to test that. And they, "Hmm, okay." And then literally every time, what will happen is something like, "So do I lose my soul when I burp too?" I don't know. You tell me, right? You're testing this claim. Okay, okay. When my dog farts, does my dog have a soul? I don't know. You tell me. And then, oh, recently I had a student say, "So if I breathe in somebody else's fart, do I get part of their soul?" I don't know. Uh, okay. And then they'll go, "Well, wait a minute. What's a soul? How do you measure a soul?" Ding, ding, ding. Right? That's the point. We can't measure that. We can't test that. It is a supernatural claim. Now, could it be true? I mean, sure, but we're never going to be able to falsify it. So we don't know. So we have to be careful with supernatural claims to, again, avoid protecting them with evidence, because they are by definition not evidence-based claims. And then finally, we get to the category where we really, really, really want something to be true. And so we make excuses. The epitome of this is conspiracy theorists, who are masters at making excuses for why evidence doesn't align. Can you see my cup? It says
Yes,
birds
they
aren't real. Do you know birds aren't real, the conspiracy theory? Oh, it is brilliant. Look, it's not a real conspiracy theory. It's satire. Basically, the people in this group, the United States government killed all of the birds in the 60s and 70s and replaced them with drones to spy on us. So you'll say, "But wait a minute, look, I see birds right there, right? On the power lines." And they'll say, "Oh, but they're charging up." Well, but a bird pooped on my car. They're tracking you, right? That's the tracking chip. There's always a way to make an excuse to incorporate the evidence, the lack of evidence, into the conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theories are immune to evidence in this way. All of that's to say, making excuses is a great way to protect a belief that is falsifiable from being falsified because we really want it to be true. So in our heads, again, just keeping in mind the kinds of things that are evidence-based and the things that aren't evidence-based. Do you know who George Carlin was?
Yes.
George Carlin, yay. All right. Have you ever noticed that anybody driving slower than you is an idiot? And anybody going faster than you is a maniac? Of course, my position is the right one, right? That's why I hold it. People over here are wrong. People over here are wrong. I've thought about it. I've used evidence. I'm unbiased. I'm reasonable. People who disagree with me are the ones who are biased. Okay, so we need to keep in mind that people can hold a variety of positions for a variety of different reasons. One of them is that we don't perceive reality objectively. You've all seen the dress, right? The dress. This is the dress that broke the internet. I don't know if you want to do a poll, quick show of hands. Who here sees a dress that is black and blue? Okay, who here sees white and gold? No.
So it's about 2-to-1 for black and blue in the room.
Ah, okay. So the dress actually is black and blue. The original dress was black and blue, but the picture of the dress was taken under ambiguous lighting conditions. And so because the picture itself is ambiguous, your brain makes guesses about the lighting that the picture was taken under. And then based on that, suggests to you the color of the dress, and you just accept it as true. Now, if you did not know that others saw this dress differently, you would just assume that what you saw is what everyone sees. I love using this because in a class, again, my students have all seen this. We've all seen the dress, but to be in a room full of people who the person next to you actually sees this dress in different colors is wonderful. People start to argue. They're like, well, how can you see that? Of course, look at it. Well, you're stupid. And oh, you just don't see it right. And here's, okay. This is the color of a dress though. And the only reason we know that people see it differently is because this went viral. But imagine this happening around political tribes, forming around ideological issues. This is the color of a dress. Now, there's this concept in psychology known as naive realism, which is that we think we perceive the world as it is, and that everybody sees it like we do. Because, of course, we are experiencing reality as it is. So if somebody disagrees with me, well, here's why you're wrong. I'm going to tell you all the facts as to why you're wrong. Okay, you still don't see it like I do? You must be stupid. That doesn't work? Well, you've been lied to, you've been tricked. Or you're evil. When actually we could literally just be perceiving reality differently. Imagine instead of looking at something like this and going, well, you're wrong and here's why. Wait a minute, you see that differently? I wonder why. That's curious. That's fascinating. I wonder I wonder what reality is. Recognize that I could be wrong. You could be wrong. I don't know. So let's just try to figure this out together. We each perceive part of reality, and maybe not even as it is. So instead of, well, here's why you're wrong, there is a reality outside of our heads. Recognizing that none of us has a perfect perception of reality as it is. And if our goal is to try to understand reality, we got to work together. This is the value of diverse perspectives. We each see something potentially slightly different, which offers us different testable hypotheses. So in this way, it isn't like here's why you're wrong, but a collaborative approach to try and figure out what reality is. Back for a hot second to the doomsday cult, expecting the aliens to arrive in their flying saucers. This was the mid-50s. And the interest in flying saucers started in the late 1940s. This was due to the Cold War hysteria, the space race. For the first time in human history, it was actually possible that humans might go to space. And there started to be this huge obsession with what's out there. And so saucers started to appear in comic books and movies and theme parks. Sometimes we will say that seeing is believing, but actually it's also the other way, that believing is seeing. I saw the witch from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs because that's what my brain expected to see. If I'd never been exposed to flying saucers, when I look up at the night sky and I see something I can't explain, I'm not going to see a flying saucer. I will see whatever else my culture has conditioned me to see. So, of course, it does make sense that people at the time would look up and, it must be a flying saucer. To make this a bit more current, I suppose, even with the same information, we can reach different conclusions. So this is a Pew poll of people who lean right and people who lean left on their perceptions of the strength of the economy over time. Okay, now what happened in 2000?
Mr. Obama was elected president.
Not in 2000. That would be 2000.
Bush.
That was Bush. All right, 2008 would be
Obama.
Obama. And 2016 would be
He must not be named.
it literally mirror images themselves overnight. Our guys in office, the economy's awesome. The other guys in office, the economy sucks. You ever watched a sporting event? I suppose it's Super Bowl Sunday. Have you ever watched a sporting event where the other person is rooting for another team? They can literally see a different game. The officials are always biased against you. Right? There are studies on protests where if you show people a protest, a picture of a protest, and they disagree with the protesters, the protest was violent. If they agree with the protest is not violent. Is a news source biased? Well, do I agree with it? If I agree, it's not biased. If I don't agree, it is biased. So there's address, but there's also aspects of reality that are even more complicated than that. And even if we're all working under the same conditions, we can actually perceive reality differently. And then today, we can all have different realities online. I love being in a room full of people and asking them to pull up their favorite social media app or news app and scroll through and see the kinds of information that you're getting versus somebody else. They can be drastically different. So a filter bubble is the our online reality, which is a consequence of two things. One is our personal choices. I like this. I don't like this. And the other is technology, like algorithms that learn what we like. These apps are free, which means that our attention is the product. And to keep us online and to keep us engaged, they learn what we will engage with. The problem is that doesn't necessarily mean the information is true. We engage more with things that confirm our biases and with things that trigger us. And so then we get trapped in our filter bubble with other people who agree with us too. And then is it any wonder that we emerge from those filter bubbles and then talk to somebody who occupies a different one? And then, wait a minute, are we occupying the same reality? You might not be. So we fall for things that aren't true, for misinformation, for three primary reasons. Like I just said, confirmation bias. If you're scrolling through something, your news feed, and you see something that fits with how you think the world works, you're not going to question it. Why would you question it? Of course, that makes sense. It fits in your web of beliefs. If it appeals to our emotions, things like anger and fear are particularly triggering for us and upset our ability to think critically and get us to engage. And then the reiteration effect, or the illusory truth effect, is the more we hear something repeated, the more likely we are to think it's true. This happens even in controlled conditions where you're originally told that something is not true. That's a danger in being in an echo chamber, because if that same false information is pinging around, then you are going to accept it as true. There's a lot of focus right now in misinformation. I study misinformation and how to help people fall for misinformation, not fall, I should say, for misinformation. And one of the things that I struggle with is there's always a focus on the misinformation itself. Let's look at the techniques of that misinformation. Why is this misleading? And what I try to argue is that it's also us. We need to know what kinds of things we are more prone to fall for. What are our own vulnerabilities? Being aware of those things will then help you not fall for misinformation. But it takes a level of awareness that a lot of people, we're not taught to have that. Okay, so we are emotional and biased, but we don't think we are. I like to think of, so you may have heard Daniel Kahneman's System 1 and System 2. It's brilliant stuff. I find that a really difficult thing for students to relate to. Jonathan Haidt uses the elephant and the rider analogy, which I really like. Imagine in your head, you have an elephant and then a rider on top of the elephant. So the elephants are big and powerful and strong. In this case, the elephant is emotional. It's biased. It's the fight, flight, or freeze reactions. Actually, there's the 4 Fs: fight, flight, freeze, or mating. There's also heuristics and biases, the kinds of things that our brain is, the errors our brains tend to make, our intuitions, right? Our gut reactions. The elephant is always on. It's fast, it's unconscious, it's involuntary, and most of the time it's good enough, right? If the elephant didn't give us at least workable information, we would probably be dead. But it's not always good. The rider sits on top of the elephant, and the rider is the part of our brain that we think of as us. So it's the part of our brain that can think logically and rationally, right? It's the part where I think, well, of course, my positions are evidence-based because I've thought about them, I've used evidence, and this is all the reasons why my belief is true. The problem is it's on top of that elephant, and that elephant is really hard to control. So most of the time, what happens is our elephant uses its biases and its emotions and its instincts, and it jumps to a conclusion, and then it suggests it to the rider, and the rider goes, yeah, that sounds right. Here's why. Here's why my elephant is right. So instead of using evidence to come to a conclusion, it just uses the conclusion the elephant gives it, and then it finds justifications for what the elephant already wanted to believe. So I really like cake. I like frosting, actually. Cake is like the vehicle for frosting. If I kid you, I will sit down with a can of frosting. If it's the good stuff, I'll just eat the whole thing. But I know that's not good for me, right? The writer in my brain knows that actually that's probably not the wisest decision. But instead of telling the elephant, hey, simmer down, you don't need that frosting, the elephant really wants it. So the writer goes, you worked out today. You won't eat cake again tomorrow, right? You'll be good tomorrow. It finds all the justifications that my elephant needs to just justify what it wants to do anyway. It's important for us to know what's happening in our brains, like paying attention to the motivations, to that stuff underlying the surface level facts stuff, right? Underneath of it, is there something driving that? But one step further, we all have elephants and riders. So if I'm talking to somebody else, we think my rider is talking to your rider. But actually, there's 4 of us in that conversation, and our riders are just justifying what our elephants wanted to believe. So more productive conversations requires not just an awareness of our own elephant, but also digging down with the other person. What might be motivating that the selection of facts? So it looks something like this on a reasoning versus rationalizing. The top, the reasoning, we think we do this. This is I follow the evidence using reasoning and logic to the most logical conclusion. But actually, what tends to happen is that we jump to a conclusion first. That's what our elephant has done, based on our identity, our emotions, self-serving interests, whatever it is. We've jumped to a conclusion. And if you're looking for evidence to support something, you're going to find it. And then you will feel justified in maintaining that conclusion. I would like to tell you that being smarter or more educated is protective at this. But actually, there are some studies that suggest just the opposite. The smarter we are, the better we are at finding justifications for what we already want to believe. So what that means is we have to really pay attention to our own motivations for why we might be believing something. And instead of trying to find reasons for why we're right, back to this idea of falsifiable beliefs, if we're talking about a belief that actually is falsifiable, instead of finding evidence to support that belief, try to prove it wrong. Don't try to confirm your bias. Try to disconfirm it. If I'm wrong about this, what would I expect to find? And actually searching for that instead. Now, the problem is that we tend to be more motivated to defend beliefs that are tied to our identity, to how we see ourselves. The part of the brain that is activated when we face a physical threat, when we face evidence that a belief we hold dear might be wrong, that same part of the brain is activated. We don't want to be wrong. We like to maintain our self-esteem, to protect our ego. The more we've invested, the more motivation we have. Our personal brand, how we portray ourselves to the world, this is what I believe. As soon as I do that, I have staked my brand on that belief. And then it's harder to change our mind on those. It is some of these core beliefs you may inherently understand, like religious beliefs, political beliefs, etc. But the kinds of beliefs that people tie to their identity, it still kind of surprises me. Like diets, for example, some people hold certain diets very close to how they see themselves. Have you heard of the full moon effect?
Mhm. Yes.
Yeah, so also known as the lunar effect, right? The word lunar, lunacy comes from moon. It's this idea that under a full moon, we act crazier, right? If you're a cop, you think there's more crime. If you're a school teacher, you think that the students act out. If you are a nurse or a doctor, you think the emergency room tends to be more full during that time. The thing is, we've done studies on this. Decades of evidence have disproven this. But some people really hold this belief, and it's very hard then to change their mind. So we want to avoid attaching our belief to how we see ourselves. But one step further, if we've attached that belief to our social identity or our tribal identity, then we have to protect that belief to maintain our social standing. Back to humans have lived most of our evolutionary history in tribes. We want to maintain standing in our social group, and that means towing the line with what our social group believes. We're rewarded for defending the group's beliefs, especially in the face of criticism from outsiders. Tribe can literally trump truth. There's a social psychologist named Brooke Harrington, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but she says something like, if there is an E equals MC squared of social psychology, it is that social death is worse than physical death.
Yep.
We've seen, for example, people dying of COVID, who still will not admit that COVID is real. And if from the outside, that can look very illogical, but actually it makes perfect sense when you consider that belief being attached to their identity and their social identity. This is why one of the most important things that we can do as critical thinkers, and one of the most difficult things to do, is to separate our beliefs from our identity. To try and hold our beliefs less tightly. Instead of I'm wrong, it's the belief is wrong. And then what happens is we get overconfident. So we get into this cycle. So motivated reasoning is this idea where if we're motivated to find evidence, we can find evidence that we need. Confirmation bias is once we think something is true, all evidence continually confirms that. And then that cycle picks up, and then I have evidence, which means I'm very confident in my belief. And then on and on and on. And then it feels true. We can't tell the difference between the feeling of knowledge and actual knowledge. All I know is I have facts and evidence, and this is obviously true for me. Now, the problem here again is what we've done is used evidence to support this belief. And then once we've done that, especially if it's attached to our identity, we can't change our minds. The full moon effect, again, is a great example. If I work, so I'm an educator, but let's say that I've noticed that my students are acting up, and I think, oh, I bet it's a full moon. If it's a full moon, I go, see, I was right. The full moon effect is totally true. But if it's not, my brain just forgets it. Doesn't even log that as something to keep in mind of evidence. It's just, So only when something confirms what I think is true do I count that as evidence. And then I get really confident. This cycle, Daniel Kahneman, the famed economist who won a Nobel Prize in part for this work, was once asked if he had a magic wand to rid the world of one bias, what would it be? And he said overconfidence. Because if we're confident, then we won't change our mind. We aren't teachable if we're sure we're right. Okay, back to our story. What happened? So the seekers prepared for December 21st. That was the date, right? They gave away their money. They lost their jobs. They thought the world was going to end. They wouldn't need that stuff. Some of them lost their kids. They moved in with Dorothy. They were told that they couldn't wear metal on the spaceship because it would react with the power field on the flying saucer, right? So they like took out their teeth fillings and they removed their zippers and all kinds of stuff. But most of all, they had to believe, right? They were getting ready for this date. Now, the date was December 21st, but they were told the Guardians could come at any moment. On December 17th, they got a phone call. Captain Video from outer space was calling. A flying saucer was going to land in Dorothy's backyard at 4 o'clock. So they ran out, they removed all of their metal. They waited for the flying saucer. Nobody showed up. They did not put together, apparently, that at the time, that was a popular radio show. They had been pranked. People were laughing at them, right? This doomsday cult that thought the world was going to end. Hey, like, this is Captain Video from outer space. The world's going to end now. Go outside. Okay. They didn't get that message. Dorothy got a message from Sananda saying it was a practice session. They were just testing to make sure on December 21st they were ready to go. On December 18th, they got another message. The aliens are coming now. No flying saucer. Oh, they couldn't figure out what happened. Did somebody forget they had tooth fillings? But they knew the real date was December 21st. On December 21st, it's finally happening, right? We're going to be vindicated. The world is going to end. This is finally what we've been saving up for, living for. Now, this comes through Leon Festinger, remember, and his group. So at midnight, there's no aliens. At 12:05, there's still no aliens. Somebody noticed that the clock was wrong, that it was 5 minutes fast. So they were okay. Just got to wait a little bit longer. At 12:10, Dorothy got another message. There's going to be a slight delay, so let's just wait a little bit. Fessinger is talking about, I can't even imagine, like I wanted to be in that room, but they were tense and silent, like this was finally the moment. At 2:20 in the morning, there were still no aliens. Dorothy received a message to take a coffee break. So they did. At 4 o'clock in the morning, there's still no aliens. Sitting around, stunned, silent, looking at each other. What had they missed? Now, do you think they changed their mind?
No.
Okay, so at 4:45 in the morning, Dorothy got a message. There was going to be no global flood because their belief and dedication had saved the world.
Oh.
Not only were, sorry?
Praise the whatever.
Not only were they right, they were so right that they had saved the world and all of humanity. Right? Thank you very much, everyone. You are welcome. Actually, up until this point, they'd been relatively insular, but after that, they went out and proselytized because they had saved the world. They were that right. This is again through from When Prophecy Fails, Leon Festinger. Charles Lawhead was a professor who lost his job and his kids in the process. And he says here, I've had to go a long way. I've given up just about everything. I've cut every tie. I've burned every bridge. I've turned my back on the world. I can't afford to doubt. I have to believe. There isn't any other truth. The more motivated we are, the better we are at finding reasons. And the more we are mocked for our beliefs, the more we lose social interactions with other people, the less likely we are to change our mind. Think about this group. They had been mocked from everyone. The only people that were on their side were the other believers. They couldn't afford to change their mind. They had staked their public reputation on it. They couldn't be wrong. They had to save face. As a science communicator, I try really hard to remember this, because if we mock people, they're not going to change their mind. No one ever says, you know what, you called me stupid. You are right. Right? That's not what happened. That's not how people change their minds. So why don't facts change our minds? They do sometimes, to be fair. But it's not about facts. That's why. On the surface, it looks like facts. It looks like I'm giving you my facts, you're giving me facts. We're having a fact. Why don't they understand my facts? My facts are clearly right and they are wrong. There is something underneath of it that's motivating it. Those are those elephants that are motivated to find evidence to support what the evidence wants to believe. There are 4 people in this conversation, not just 2. And so it's important to understand what's underneath that fact selection. So take-home messages here. Your writer can train your elephant, but it takes a lot of work. So you can think critically, you can train the elephant, but we have to be aware of what's happening and consciously choose to do that. And it's not about facts. So talk to their elephant, have empathy. People might actually be experiencing reality differently. They might have different information. They have different perceptions. So dig to find the underlying roots of the disagreement. Are they values, worldviews, identity needs? Connect with people as much as possible. If a person doesn't have any other place except for the other people that hold a belief that's clearly not true, then that's where they're going to stay. So as much as possible, try to be that place where people can go and have these conversations in a non-judgmental way, where we can model curiosity and empathy and skepticism. Now, I'm running out of time. What I normally do with my students is this exercise here, which is a wonderful exercise, not just for thinking about our own beliefs, but in having conversations with others. I will come back to this if anybody wants to ask questions about it. Otherwise, my website has Foundations Critical Thinking course. All the graphics that I've used are available on it. I try to post something on Facebook every day. I'm also on YouTube and so on. And I just want to give a giant thank you to the Capital District Humanists and to Dawn and Fred for having me, and all of you for allowing me to be with you today.
We appreciate your time. Great.
Should I stop my share?
Yeah, it would be great if you could.
Okay. Okay, great.
And then we will. So welcome again. Thank you so much. We did have a few questions or comments in the chat. I want to read back to you and get your thoughts. Early on in your presentation, you talked about, and sometimes you deal with your students, you don't ask questions about God. And the question is, why is God a trigger?
Well, okay, so I'm a science educator, and there are certain religious beliefs that are perceived to conflict with science. For example, creationism. For some reason, like evolution is perceived to conflict with the belief in God. Now, it can conflict with creationism. But that's to say, in science class, then what I try and do is scientific claims have to be falsifiable. If you can't measure it, if you can't test it, then it's not science. Could it be true? Sure. But it's not science. So we just need to make sure that we keep it there. So I just try to make that very clear and separate so that students feel safe potentially holding those beliefs, but I still find ways to get them to think about, like the fart example, for example. I have this great comic too with, I think it's Dan Sparrow. If there's like a king from it looks like maybe early Europe, and the king says something like, our ships are sinking because Neptune is punishing us for tolerating the left-handed. Okay, now claims today might be something like God is punishing us with COVID or whatever that is. I'm not going to do that, but I can show something like that and at least plant a seed and get them to understand why that itself isn't falsifiable.
Okay, thank you. Daphne said the example that abortion is murder is not an evidence-based belief, even though taking the opposing view that even the killing of a potential for life is murder. Some religious-minded people, and they feel that it is only that is a proper evidence. What it comes when I come, okay, I'm missing something I can't cover. When it comes to these unfalsifiable positions, is the proper understanding that one cannot change their minds, and therefore we should avoid these conversations. Is that a proper course of action?
That is an interesting question. Because to me, there's two parts there. One is the actual claim itself on, let's say abortion is wrong. Simplified to something like that. Abortion is wrong. That is not a falsifiable belief, but there's something motivating that particular belief. Whether it is addressable or not, I think we can find common ground on these issues. So I think any of these issues, even unfalsifiable ones, we can find common ground on. Whether you want to or not, that is up to you. The relationship that you have with that person, your reasons for entering into that conversation. So there are ways to do it, and it doesn't, because it's unfalsifiable, doesn't mean that it's not something that is important or can be addressed. It just changes how we talk about it because of it not being an objective claim.
Mm-hmm. Aaron Reyes posted a comment here, a link to a national health website, National Library of Medicine, about empathy predicts false belief reasoning ability. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Say that one more time. Empathy predicts what?
False belief reasoning ability.
Okay. I am not familiar with that.
Okay, so it was an interpretation he had. I guess it's, if anybody wants to find out more about that, look at the link in the chat. Daphne said that she tries to use allsides.com, side-by-side, left, right, center articles to access news same stories. And I think that comment came in while you were talking about how we tend to we get news we like for this.
Yeah. Yeah, fact checking is a really important skill, and I will use that as well. There's also the media bias chart, the Ad Fontes. There's another one. Actually, Wikipedia is a pretty great source if you're just going like broad view on like who's behind a particular source that you're unfamiliar with. The most important thing there, though, is to be skeptical of what we see, and we're less likely to be skeptical when it aligns with what we already believe. So recognizing that, this source tells me what I want to believe. It's so important to like exercise that skeptical radar in your head that says, wait, is that true? Because if you don't actually ask, then you won't check.
So Daphne also pointed out that when you were talking about the elephant and the rider, she was reminded that the 10 ox herding pictures is closely related to this notion.
The what?
The 10 ox herding. There was a link she posted to the Wikipedia article about 10 bulls. I'm not familiar with it.
I'm not either, but I need to. Okay.
So it's bulls of 10, or I think it's something like herding cats is my suspicion.
No, it's 10 ox herding pictures, right? It's Zen Buddhism.
Okay. Zen, you know about this?
I don't know about them, other than I've seen them in Zen monasteries. And it's 10 pictures of a guy herding an ox in different ways. And it's just, how do you herd your ox? And obviously it's like the elephant and the rider. And you just get better at it. The ox gets smaller. It's cool. They're a neat series. It's a neat series of drawings. They're beautiful and they're done by a great artist, and it's fun to look at.
Okay, thank you. So you should, the knowledge that comes out of the room, amazing.
That's awesome.
Aaron Ray has also posted 99.99% of our decisions are not very important. They don't have high cost from a risk, danger, options point of view. And as we become more modern, socially, economic advances, our decisions become less important. It's a comment. Daphne commented, you guess I'm probably Buddhist, to separate our beliefs from our identified. This is interesting because while people find it being difficult, being a Buddhist is the tough goal. It is tough to be comfortable with resting in non-identity and not clinging to views. I don't mean that you don't have them, but you don't cling to them.
Mm.
And then she also said, this is why I don't even like the word Buddhist. She just likes just the practice. When you were talking about overconfidence, it reminded me of the Dunning-Kruger effect that makes the rounds every so often. How people that know a little think they know are very important.
The Dunning-Kruger effect is a wonderfully hysterical example of the, well, it can also be really frustrating, of an overconfidence bias. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. So somebody's raised their hand. Richard, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, you left out the most important part, which is how is the brain to free itself from this tremendous accumulation of conditioning programming from centuries and centuries conditioning. You left out the most important part. How is the children at the earliest age, right, to be set free, to wake up from the dream world, right, from the illusion-making machinery called the me, the I, the self, the mind, the psyche, the consciousness. Just different words for the same bundle of active memory, which is the past, which is acting as the observer, the perceiver, the experiencer, the chooser. Every thought you're having right now, everything out of your mouth, all your reactions are coming from that bundle of active memory. The active memory, the conditioning, is doing the thinking. And that active memory is limited. Your knowledge is limited. Your experiences are limited, right? So you're always moving from the past, from the limit. And therefore, your every action is contributing to the conflict, the violence, the brutality, the disorder, the chaos of the world, 24/7.
Okay.
Now, the question is how to be aware of what's happened, right? How to be aware.
Can we let Melanie respond to you?
Mhm.
Thank you. Melanie?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. Literally everything that we are, our brain knows. All of our beliefs and how we're perceiving the world is based on those basic assumptions. And so, I mean, you ask, I'm not sure if there's a question in there. I think awareness is probably one of the best things that we can do, and just recognizing that we are all limited in our ability to understand the world.
Thank you, Richard.
Yeah,
Melanie.
you didn't answer the question. Your brain, right? The human brain is highly conditioned. Now, I'm not interested in tomorrow. I'm interested in freedom now, right? Freedom from this accumulative interference of the past, which prevents presence, which prevents listening.
I think we have a response in the room. Laird?
Okay, when I was in 4th grade, my science teachers taught me that it's the job of a scientist to entertain perspectives. That when there are multiple possible solutions to a question, what the scientist is required to do is to, with each one at a time, to adopt the assumptions of that perspective and follow where they lead. Now, in effect, what that really is the same thing as if someone were to tell me they knew a shortcut to work for me that would save me 10 minutes each direction. I might not believe that was true, but my job is to let the person show me. And if they take me down a street that I believe is a dead end, it's not my job to balk. It's my job to let them demonstrate to me that that's not a dead end. So my reaction when someone presents me with an idea that I think is controversial is to say, thank you. I've been looking for somebody who understands this. Can you tell me the top reason in your mind that compels a person like me to see it your way? And then that way, if they know what they're talking about, I learned something. If they don't know what they're talking about, they can't explain it. It's a technique programmers use, that when a programmer has a hard time finding a logical problem in a program, if a second programmer comes and simply stands next to them while they talk it out, the first programmer normally finds their own problem, because something in the act of having to explain it causes them to have to question their own assumptions that they would otherwise skip past. So I think that the answer to freeing the mind is that skill of being able to entertain a perspective.
Thank you.
I know. Where are we here?
Okay, so we have another comment from the chat. That is, let me get this here, an issue. Aaron says an issue he has with the humanist atheist community is how mean, cruel, or angry people can be towards others that don't fully believe, whether not believe in science or evidence, etc. We forgot most people get their beliefs from our family or our core kinship group. Most are independent actors that are not living on an island. So it's not a question per se, but I think it relates very well to what you were talking about, Melanie, how we are so caught up in our peer group rather than and what we believe rather than looking at facts.
I agree. Yes.
Okay, see, a question for Melanie from Daphne. Talk more about how to address the values, worldviews, and identity beliefs of the elephant carrying the rider, and how do we address that animal more wisely?
Yes, that's a really, really good question. So do you mind if I share my screen again?
Yes, go right ahead.
Okay. Because I actually think are you seeing getting into the habit of questioning beliefs?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the thought exercise that I do, and also really helpful when talking with somebody else. I mean, the first thing I would say is when we're talking about changing somebody's mind, I think an important first question is to ask yourself why you want to do that, and also remember that the price of admission of trying to change somebody else's mind is to be willing to change our own minds as well. So what I like to do is this thought exercise. I'm going to take you through the basic way and then how to talk to somebody else. So the example I like to use is how many species of elephant do you think there are? Did I hear two?
Yes, two in the room.
Probably 100.
100?
Anywhere from two to a lot.
Okay. How sure are you?
I hear a lot of.
Okay.
No idea.
Okay, so but this first question here is something that's really important, which is just this basic idea of stopping to think about beliefs as true or false and more on a spectrum. That first step actually has an incredible, it's a great way to introduce less dogmatism, less extremism into someone's beliefs, just the practice of proportioning.
You read this?
Yeah.
Read this. It makes sense why he went this question.
So
So the source of the belief is where you start to ask yourself, where did this come from, right? A personal experience? Is it, if I heard it someplace, where would that be? The reasons for believing it's true. Now, this is where, even if it's unfalsifiable belief, because we're talking, the question here is about the things that aren't, but the reasons for believing it's true, we can come up with reasons even for the unfalsifiable stuff.
For what?
How could you figure out if it's true? This is the question where you start to ask yourself, is this something that is falsifiable? Because if it's not, then recognizing that it's not evidence-based, but that's still fine. Number 5, I actually just want to ask you all here. So you've told me how many species of elephant you think there are, and you've told me how sure you are that you think it's true. How would you feel if you were wrong?
A lot of,
There's not a whole lot that rests on whether I'm right or wrong about that.
Okay. I like to start with beliefs like this because most people don't care. And actually, some people are like, you know what, that'd be awesome. I'd learn more about elephants, right? That's great. That feeling right there, though, how would you feel if you're wrong? Not caring if you were wrong is the feeling that I like to get my students to practice. Imagine caring that little about being wrong for any of our other beliefs. Now, what evidence would change your mind? This question here gets to the nature of denial versus skepticism. If you can't think of anything that would change your mind, then there's no need to have this conversation. But you should always be willing to change your mind. Now, if I'm having this conversation with somebody else then, and even if it's about something that's like an identity-based issue, how sure are you that's true? So we would start there. And after you tell me, so let's say that you're 95% confident. I'm not going to ask you why you're right. What I want to do is find out, why do you think you might be wrong? Interesting. You told me you're 95%. Why aren't you 99%? So that question gets people to come up with their own reasons for why they might be wrong. I could tell you why I think you're wrong, but it's better for you to come up with that yourself, right? You're not going to just accept my reasoning into your head. You are doing the reasoning yourself. Using this with somebody else, even for unfalsifiable and identity-based beliefs, is a great way to connect, to empathize, to reason together. It's basically Socratic questioning, right? I didn't come up with this. Socrates did this a couple thousand years ago. If you want more information on something like this, the street epistemology folks are wonderful. They have a brand new course too, and it's free. David McRaney has a great book on how minds change. But all that's to say that you can use something like this to address any belief, not just a falsifiable one, but also an unfalsifiable one. And reason together with someone to explore that process of their own reasoning, and hopefully get them to potentially see flaws in their reasoning and maybe improve it. Did that help? That was a great question.
yes, it was. Okay, we have a question in the room. Sue, you want to come up and take a microphone?
Yes.
Yeah.
Get out of my way here.
So my question is, what about when you're on the other side of it? When, I'll tell you an example that I've been thinking about as you've been talking. I was having a conversation with a friend who we were talking about how to deal with a particular sort of pain. And she was pushing acupuncture. And I said I had looked into that possibility and I didn't think that the evidence supported it. And her response was to say, why are you so, two responses. One was, why are you so closed-minded? And the second one was, well, those people who researched it are just trying to prove that it doesn't work. So I was kind of stymied for what to say, but so how to respond when somebody is telling you that you're the one who is wrong, when you're not I wasn't particularly interested in changing her mind, but I wanted her to stop trying to change mine.
Okay.
What then?
Yeah.
Ideas for that? Because I have that kind of conversation with people all the time.
Oh,
Thank
that's
you.
interesting. Yeah. Oh, so the open-minded thing is it like I got to be honest, that triggers me a little when people say that because often what they mean is they just want me to accept something without evidence, and that's not what open-minded is, right? The great like you want to be open-minded, but not so open that your brains will fall out. Yeah. I mean, if you don't want to enter into the conversation, then you have to set your own boundaries and just, you know, you don't want to enter into this conversation. But if somebody's really trying to convince you yeah, for me, for something like acupuncture, I would probably ask them, you know, why they think something is true. And also scientists are trying to prove it wrong because that's how science works. Like you don't go into a field to try to prove it right. The proper process of science is to try to prove it wrong. And the basic like premise of acupuncture, like it doesn't make any sense. It is a supernatural, it's a form of energy medicine. Yeah, that's a hard thing because it depends on a lot of things, like who the person is to you. And it sounds like you don't want to change their mind, you just don't want to have the conversation. So gosh, I don't know. I don't know. I've never been asked that question. Does anybody else have a thought?
I don't know, but there, Eric had a very similar question in the chat about, and this may be a different way at the same topic. How do you overcome a negative reaction from someone who feels as if you are challenging their beliefs?
Are you challenging their beliefs? In this case, like,
If they feel if they feel that their beliefs are being challenged.
Man, you're asking really good questions.
May I say something?
Yeah, please.
I think that sometimes what I'll do is I'll say to people that, you know, we don't agree and that's okay.
Oh, yeah.
Because sometimes it's not fruitful to, I don't want to say argue with stupid, but sometimes people are on different wavelengths and they're stuck on their own wavelength and you're not going to get there. And that can resolve if you're in a palatable relationship, and that can be resolved that way if you're never going to talk to them again. So it's kind of a benign way of handling it.
Yeah, I mean, I will admit that I come at this from a science communication perspective. And so I'm trying to communicate, for example, in this case, what acupuncture would be and what the evidence is and isn't for something like acupuncture. One of the comments that I tend to get when these kinds of things come up is, well, but what's the harm? Right. So like I tried acupuncture and I feel better. So, you know, what's the harm? And I think that's an important question, actually, because critical thinking is great, but if you don't turn it on, then it's no good to you. And so I find the what's the harm question actually to be quite motivating. Like if it costs $100 for a session of acupuncture, to me, that's harm because that's $100 I could spend on something else. But there's also potential harm, like people have been like lungs punctured. They actually have been physically harmed from something like acupuncture. And there's also if people are using acupuncture in place of actual medical care and they are delaying in that window of time where they could be getting better care. Like studies have shown that people who use alternative medicine are like 40% more likely to die of cancer than those who use evidence-based care. And so every moment you delay getting care for something like that is harm. So that's what I would focus on. But I think the audience for something like that is different. It's not like an interpersonal thing.
Thank you. We have a question in the room, Therese.
Yes. Is this on? Can you all? Yes, Melanie, thank you so much for this really great presentation. I learned a lot and I'm going to try to put into practice some of the things to think about. I did want to say that I have some training in a particular practice of meditation related to Buddhism. There's so many kinds of Buddhism that, and I've also taken a course in nonviolent communication. And I'd like to say, if you are talking with someone who challenges your beliefs or is very angry at you, learning how to listen with great compassion is one avenue that I've practiced with particular skill building. And right now, it's the only avenue that I feel is appropriate for me to use with someone like that. Now, I'm still practicing. I'm not perfect. And also, I understand that everything I'm saying comes from my own confirmation bias. But I will say that in my own life, in two particular emotionally charged situations, what I learned from meditation and from nonviolent communication has preserved the relationship rather than destroyed the relationship. And so, but I guess my question for you is, you seem in many aspects of your remarks to be heading toward that, to be heading toward empathy, curiosity, listening, and choosing a response. What would you say about the nonviolent communication and the meditation approach of just listening with perfect attention to the other person?
I think there's great value in being present in a conversation and empathy and connection. And actually, I would be really curious to learn more about the nonviolent communication. So if you can share some of that with me, I would love to see it. The meditation, I personally don't meditate. I can't control my mind enough to do that. And I feel like I still should. It's on my to-do list. Let's just say that. But there are, from what I understand, the kinds of metacognitive awareness that can come through something like that, of being aware of your motivations, your emotions, your biases, and being present in your own mind. And I can imagine not just that being helpful for yourself, but in being with another person in a conversation that way and modeling that, I think for others as well could be really valuable. Can you please send stuff my way?
Okay, we'll get stuff to you.
Thank you.
Jennifer online had raised her hand. Can you unmute yourself, Jennifer, and a question for our speaker?
I didn't have a question. I had a comment. I also studied. I actually have books on nonviolent communication, and also was raised a Buddhist. But I also lived as an adult with my mother for 10 years, and I have a teenage child. So I can tell you, I've dealt quite a bit with confrontations and over disagreeing with a million different things. So what I found was effective, particularly with my mother, was to create boundaries on what topics were acceptable to talk about together. And this worked for, once I figured out what the boundaries were, what topics I could discuss with her, and I use this with both of my adult sons, it's easy to avoid conflict, not perfectly, because sometimes things come up that are triggering conversations, but for the most part, create boundaries. This is a safe subject. This is a safe subject. When we are together, we are going to talk about these subjects. So that's what I found works.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Mhm.
Risa in the room has a question. Risa, you want to take a microphone, please?
Just to put it out there, again, the street epistemology, if you're not familiar with street epistemology, I'm getting the sense that a lot of you might enjoy what it is that they do. So they have a great YouTube channel. As I said, they have a new course and it's free, but it's about this collaborative reasoning. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, hi, Melanie. I just wanted to first of all say thank you for a very coherent, cogent, well thought out presentation. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Can you hear the applause?
Oh, thank you.
I think any conversation has to be, you have to be clear on how you define your terms. I know a lot of people who confuse belief for truth, that if they believe it, it must be true. And I try to talk about the difference between belief and truth. I always define faith. People talk about, oh, you must have faith, and we have faith. Faith is the thing you believe without proof, but believing it makes sense to you, gives you comfort, makes your world make sense to you. And it becomes, as you say, part of that elephant of belief that I believe it, so it must be true, is false thinking. And the question of what is true and what is false and belief, those are different things. And so it's really important in any conversation to make sure that we're clear that a belief does not necessarily reflect the truth. It can, but there's only one truth. I've had a lot of people in the last few years say, oh no, there's, we have different truths. No, you have different things you believe, but that doesn't make it true. There's only one true thing. And so conversation and debate is to try to get to what is true and what is belief. There are certain people have been talking about triggers, the kinds of conversation we've seen in the last 10 years that trigger huge upsets and differences in opinions and arguments about what's true, belief in God, whether or not abortion's okay, who should be president, who our current president is. Were those people violent or weren't they? And you saying that, if you have a certain belief, then when you see the actual footage of the event, you say, well, look, they're not violent at all. If you have the other belief, you look at the footage and say, gosh, those people were violent. That's terrifying. And so trying to sort out belief from truth is a huge issue. And just defining the terms belief and truth is a huge issue. So thank you for helping clarify a lot of this. And I kind of want to be one of your students for the next year and learn more. So thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. My students would probably disagree with you because
So we have a question in the room if we can. A question. Please, not a speech.
I just wanted to say that I really liked what you had to say about separating personal identity from what you believed and what you think. And I think that this is absolutely crucial to any sort of dialogue. And I love the way you presented various ways to make these separations. I think they're really great. And I appreciate it. I think I like the clarity of it. And I think we've seen a lot of different points of view here. In fact, I would say in answer to your elephant question, there are over 8 billion of us on the planet, and there are 8 billion different elephants. I think we each have one. Our cats have different elephants. I've never seen two cats with the same elephant. And I doubt that parameciums have the same elephants. And it's well, Richard may be right about the brain thing. I don't know. He's got a different model in mind. I am perfectly willing to accept Richard's model, but I don't actually believe it. It doesn't work for me. It's very nice, the Buddhist model. I love them dearly, but I don't do it. I just want to say I like your rational approach, and I think it's very positive. So thank you.
Thank you. Defane had a question. Defane, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, hello. Again, Melanie, thank you for your lesson. It was wonderful. My question is, as rationalists, as a group, navigating our present circumstances in this country, how how do we how would you advise those like us who adhere to rationality and scientific measures with vast swaths of the country that doesn't do that? And do you and another question is, do you feel that there is some type of historical can I say this? The thing that comes up for me is the emotionality that can enwrap the country that can bring a dictatorship like Nazi Germany. This is what's coming up for me. So I want to get your kind of point of view about the direction of the country and what we can do to navigate it well, if you have a view.
Yeah, so you ask easy questions. I appreciate that. Um, yeah, okay. So I am also concerned because we do occupy so many different realities, and I find it hard it's nearly impossible to come up with solutions when we don't work from the same basic understanding of how reality works. And as an educator, I'm trying really hard to help people take control of their own thinking and be empowered to understand reality enough to make better decisions for themselves. I think one of the biggest issues that we're facing is misinformation and the ways that our own biases and tribal nature and emotions are being hijacked by people with vested interests in doing so. And again, like I'm not queen of the world, so I can't make those kinds of big policy decisions. But I do think we need to do a much better job of all this to say, I focus on the consumer end because I don't have any power to do otherwise. So I think the best that we can do is to try to model these things ourselves and try in whatever way that you can to help other people. And with as much as possible, again, being aware that we all have boundaries that we need to maintain for our own sanity, to maintain connections with people who disagree with us on various issues, because if they lose those connections, then the only people that they have are those in those same extreme bubbles.
Good ideas. Thank you much, Melanie. I don't see any other questions at this point, and I think we've taken enough of your afternoon already. We do appreciate your time and very interesting presentation.
Thank you. I really appreciate your time.
We all need to thank. Thank you much. Have a great day. Good afternoon.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
All right, thanks.